Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. And welcome to everyone who stayed for the debate. Your question, I mean, the film touches on so many important issues and concerns, and I think one of the main things that that is probably left out a little bit, and we can talk more about kind of the politics of that, but that is the topic of prevention. It's very much concerned with what to do in the situation where our children are already in this situation, and what to do afterwards, and what happens after. And then it touches upon a very important question of the role of the consumers who buy these very cheap products. But I think it's also crucial to talk about prevention. And I say that as an anthropologist working in some of the communities, not in India, and I should say I'm not a specialist in India, which is why I'm happy to be here with you. I work in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, and in Nigeria, but some of these issues are obviously not only about India. This is about a global problem, and here I think we have to look at what's going on in the communities where children are migrating from, and what actually to do in these areas. So that would be my first answer to your question is, what about prevention? And that's also a topic that that is highly politicized, because it's about more structural questions of development and economics.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Vaya Foundation for having me here. And I must congratulate the producer and the director of this movie for bringing out this very important and very serious issue, which is a part of Sustainable Development Goals. Now the question is whether raids and rescues are a kind of important part of the whole game. And I would like to say that yes, it is indeed an important part, in the sense that it is one of the important implementation tool to really address this issue. There are several laws, for instance, in India, and these laws haven't really come very recently, but they are as old as the independence itself. Because right from the day we became independent, we started thinking about this child labor, and we became independent in 1947. I'm talking about Indian perspective, and within that Indian perspective, the importance of raids. So that is what actually I'm trying to address here. So we became independent in 1947. In 1948, the first Factory Act came, and this Factory Act actually addressed the issue of child labor. It prohibited child labor. So right from the word go, we were concerned about that, and over the years, the entire legal battery actually has been strengthened. Several new laws came, and they became more stringent, penalties became more stringent, and things like that. But then the problem is that how to implement these laws. And I think that one way to implement is one way, but not the only way. Is to really implement it through these rates, and this is what the state has also provided for. At both the central and the state levels, we have several committees which are actually responsible for implementing this law. So we have the Ministry of Labor, we have the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare, we have at the state levels, we have these ministries, and then all these ministries have their own projects for rehabilitation of children and to address the issue of children. And then we have vigilance committees, monitoring committees, human rights commission. So there are several institutional, there's a kind of network of institutions which are really trying to implement this. And the tool, essentially, what I was also telling you was these raids and rescues. And in the movie, actually, there is so much of emphasis, because it is about Kailash, and Kailash actually is an activist. And because he's an activist, his only mode of contributing his bit is through these rescues and raids. So I think that well, actually, a little concern I have about the movie was that there was a lot of focus on Kailash and what he's doing about these raids and about rehabilitation. I would have wished to really see more. I thought that this was too person-centric in that sense, and I wish that some of the issues which were raised in the movie, actually, they were not sufficiently highlighted. in the process of the movie. So they talked about consumerism, they talked about these global value chains where multinational companies are getting responsible for this cost-cutting competition. So they actually raised, and poverty, so they actually raised those issues, but they went into the background, and the more prominently visible thing was the raids. So I think that is the reason why it became prominent, but I do think that several issues were raised in the movie. I do think that raids are a little important. I mean, they are important, they are a tool of implementation, but then they are not the only tool, and we need to really look at the prevention and what Sine has just said, and we really have to look into the roots of this problem. Why? So this is why foundation, why there is child, who are responsible, are we responsible, how can we contribute to this entire global challenge that many of these countries are facing. So it's not merely about India, it's about, as Sine said, it is a kind of the problem, global problem, particularly the problem of emerging markets, which is development related.
But I think we should also kind of listen between the cracks in the film. As an anthropologist, I've done a lot of work among migrants themselves and migrant families, like some of the families we meet here, and it's not really, maybe it doesn't really come forward, but this is very much about rural-urban migration and children going to the bigger cities to work. And you probably noticed that there were several places in the film where the children were saying like, I was scared, or the police came and took me, and then the organization said, no, we rescued you. And that kind of contrast between the experience of the children themselves and then how governments and organizations are trying to solve these issues through raids and rescue are one of the reasons why, even though it's a part of the solution, it's also part of the problem. Because many children, there was just a large study that came out from Harvard that interviewed a lot of the children who have been rescued in these kind of ways, and they actually felt quite traumatized by it. So on the one hand, there's no question that these children should be taken out of this situation, but more and more activists are actually trying to look into, and I know that Kailash is actually also doing that, looking into other kind of ways in which this can be done, rather than these quite traumatizing and violent rescue missions. And you also see that some of the children, they kind of jump from one house to the other. There's been several instances where actually children are hurt in these rescue missions. So while it does seem like a solution, I think we should also have a critical eye on what's going on here, and other kind of ways to do this. And some of the solutions that has been put out there in terms of prevention is actually to acknowledge that, as some of the children also said, one of the children also said, I was going there because my sister was getting married and I wanted to help the family. So it's about labor, and it's about labor migration, and it's not only about evil traffickers who are exploiting a system, which they obviously do. So some of the kind of smaller organizations in rural areas, not only in India but in many different places in the world, are trying to take that problem of prevention and labor and money making seriously by combining school and labor for the children. So instead of having to migrate to the larger cities, they are trying to say, okay, so what if you go to school for 5 hours in the morning and then you come and work for 3 hours in the afternoon? Many of these programs are implemented by women and the children's mothers, and trying to be more systemic about it throughout in rural areas. So when I talk about prevention, that is what I mean. It's not that rescue operations should not be there. Obviously, I mean, no one would want children in these kind of circumstances, but more focus on the different kind of experiences with prevention. I think it's really crucial.
Yeah, actually I agree with you, Sine, and in fact I would like to relate this whole problem with a kind of bigger thing, and that is economic development. I would actually like to relate it with economic development. It is very much and also as economists, actually, we think that it is more about, I mean, this, even if you talk about labor market, you know, it is like in a setting of a developing country. You know, I think this is how we can look at it. And if we go into history, we find that many of the developed countries now, including your own country, they had a kind of lot of child labor in the initial stages of your development. In fact, in Italy, if we believe some of these figures given in studies, 80% of children in the age group of 10 to 14 were reported working at the turn of this century. And this percentage remained quite substantial until the latter half of this, the previous century. And this is not only about Italy, but if you even look at UK, in the UK, 38% of the children in that age group were working at the turn of the century. In the United States, it was around 18 to 20%. So actually, this problem eventually got resolved only when there was a certain level of threshold level of development that was achieved. So development is something which is very important, but at the same time, I would like to say that now the development process is becoming more complex. And we find that development is not directly resulting into job creation, which had happened in the past. And this kind of complex relationship between development, employment, and poverty, this now needs to be looked into. And I personally believe that the developed world can really help a lot in really looking at not only their own interests, but also the global interests. I have actually worked on these issues and also the kind of, I was actually working with Doha development round and until it collapsed. And I found that how it collapsed. And so I think that there is a kind of, we need to really have greater participation of the developed countries also to ensure that development is more inclusive, this is sustainable, and this benefits the global gains. So this is what I would like to talk about. I mean, I would really like to emphasize when it comes to prevention that the supporting development in all other countries is something which needs to be highlighted when I'm really addressing the audience from the developed world. Second, very important, let me just one more point I would like to make before it goes to you. The second important point is about this pattern, the development pattern that I was talking about. This development pattern is now different in the sense that whole architecture of trade, global trade and investment has changed. Now everything is rooted through global value chains. So big, large companies, they have disintegrated their production processes, they relocated them in different countries to seek cost advantages. And this is how the global value chains have been proliferating. I'm not against global value chains. I think that this is an important way because this is how the system is now. But what I am actually worried about is the social dimension of these global value chains. I'm really worried about the way there is so much focus on profit margins by these companies, and there's a lot of pressure on cost cutting on developing countries. There are several subcontractors who are working for these large companies. There was an instance of Pond's company. Pond's company they are actually a kind of they are a subsidiary of Unilever. So I think that these are. It's very important that there should be some more sense of responsible management. So we should actually try to see that the management thinks more about the society and it is socially responsible. And in that sense, TNCs can do a lot. And it's not about charity. It's about the fact that they are generating a lot of wealth through these countries, through these global value chains. So they have some sort of responsibility to give back to this, because they are just getting such large markets, they are getting cheap labor. So I think it becomes very important to get this point through. I taught this thing in my class and I found that the students were like, why should we bother? They should look at their own problems, and they should address their own problems. And this was a response that really shocked me. And this is why actually I am trying to raise this point that it is not only important to really support the growth process and to really look into a kind of the problems of emerging economies, but also to make the management of these companies responsible and to drive this point home that, look, this is not for the welfare of, this is not a kind of charity, this is nothing about doing some favors, but this is something which can ensure sustainable development in the world.
And I think what you point to there is kind of where to put the blame for this.
No, I am not. No.
Yeah, no. You were talking about that we have to think about. The blame is somewhere, so it's okay to talk about blame.
No, well, actually, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm addressing this developed world audience. This movie was also shown for that. So I really wanted to place them as, because of course, I don't say that, you know, the government is not to be blamed. I don't say that the people are not, I'm really not saying that the people who are actually suffering, those who are in the midst of this, they are not to be blamed. I'm not saying that. And the blame lies there. I'm not saying that, please. I'm just trying to really say that there can be contribution from this part of the world as well.
Yeah, and I did get that.
Oh, okay.
That was actually what I got out of it. I just think it's important to talk about the responsibilities. And one thing that I liked about the film was this pointing to home sense and these kind of larger global companies and how to take responsibilities through consumerism. What I would say I'm a little bit more critical towards in the film is the way the children's parents are addressed. And the way that they become kind of criminalized for the involvement in the children. And that has often been an issue in many of these kind of child labor arrangements, that it ends up being the parents who are blamed for it. And it's not that parents are not involved and not have a responsibility, but I think this film a little bit too much ends up kind of criminalizing the parents and saying, so do you love money more than your children? I mean, you can't put it in that kind of dichotomy, saying that it's about love or it's about money. It's much more complicated than that, and that I think it's quite problematic when it ends up being that poor people don't love their children and they sell their children. And it's not that that's not going on, but it's just to say that I would have liked the film to be a little bit more complex in the relation to the parents. Obviously, he says that I have met many parents who then end up putting the children to school, but we also just have to realize the situation for many of the parents and some of the large studies on what happens after the rescue, because one thing is prevention, then what happens after the rescue? And actually what quite often happens is, as we see Samjet, I think his name is, you're probably better pronouncing than me, but the young boy who has these scars, and he ends up working in the brick factory after being rescued. And so much of kind of the problem is that several of these raid and rescue, and this organization is actually quite good at it, but some of the smaller organizations don't have the money that a Nobel Prize winner has. So he has very long monitoring and kind of reintegration processes, but some of them only have a few months, and then it's like, then you are back to scratch. And so many of the children end up being back in the factories within a year.
I'm sorry, Sine, we're going to have to stop you there. It's very interesting what you're saying, but we need to have time for questions from the audience. So is there anyone out there who has a question? So are you able to yell hi?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think contrary to be very direct and straight, I am very pleased with the film. Myself being an Indian, I think the credit should be given to Kailash, because he's, as he says in the film, this compassion needs to be globalized. I know these intellectual, economic arguments, they are very good, but I think he personally is a great example of a person who drops out of this dream of everybody has to be a doctor and engineer, takes this whole mission just like Mahatma Gandhi did, and I think very well deserved the Nobel Prize. And I think this film...
I didn't say he didn't deserve it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all right. It's very good to analyze, but in my view, the director, the film project is excellent, and I wish that my country, which makes 1,000 films, Bollywood, could do something like this. creating social realistic film, which is absolutely inspiring. I know, and he says it very clearly in the film, that rescue operations are not enough. But how the hell are you going to get the children out of this working place? And I have lived in India, and I know this very well. There is no other way. How are you going to rescue these girls who are working as sex slaves as young as 9 and 11 years old? You think you can convince them with economic and social arguments? No, you have to do a raid. And I think that's why we should really respect that he's put his life at risk. And I know just to do small things you can be killed. This is a huge industry. And we got to understand.
Yeah,
and
I understand that. But wouldn't it be better that the children were not even ended up there? That's when I talk about prevention.
Actually, yes. Let me just also take up this because, because he's talking about his reference to India. I think, yes, actually, it's okay that he's contributing to this bit. And I tell you that, and as I mentioned, that government is also doing a similar things. They are also actually having these vigilant committees which are going for raids and rescue operations. But so in that sense, it's okay. But what is very important is the origin of that problem. We have to really see where the origin is, and we have to address that. That is what we are talking about. Okay, so we actually really have to see that we are addressing these issues like poverty. We are addressing the kind of social thinking. It is not about poverty only. Let me also tell you that it is also about the fact that the education is in India related always with jobs, and many of the parents who have their own family businesses, like all these weavers and all those family businesses, they feel that once they get their children educated, they are not really going to get, they are not really going to promote their own business, and they are going to go out and they are going to do some jobs. So this kind of social thinking also needs to be changed. So it is not merely about that. So actually what the problem is that we really want to see that, where the origin is. It is okay. I mean, we are not really saying, we are not really criticizing what Kailash is doing. After all, he is recognized for whatever he is doing. But I think that what is very important is to really understand and change the perceptions, change the kind of situations, the settings in which people are living. That is what is more important.
I definitely think there's agreement that there needs to be an approach to it from all fronts. But are there any other questions? No? And up to the top there? That's a long way to yell, but I'll repeat the question.
How can we get informed on how to shop? So every time we read made in India, is it then made by a child, or is it any way you can...
Oh. Wow, actually this is something which actually I was really scared of, because I think that such movies have that kind of impression that gets across when they are shown. But let me tell you that in India child labor is banned, and even if you talk about these carpet industries, then it is banned even there. And the number of children that are involved in this industry, that has come down drastically. So it is not about that. You think about when you buy a branded product like Gap. Many of the children who were working for Gap subcontractor were also rescued by Subhash. So I think that by Kailash, sorry. So I think it is important to know that it is not that any product that is made in India is done by children, because children are very much in schools, and of course the number has come down. It was 10.6 million, now it is 4.4 million, and it is further coming down with economic growth taking place in the country, with more enrollment ratios, literacy rate, everything is growing up. So it is not like that. But of course now there are certain social auditing organizations that are certifying these things, that this product is free of child labor. So that's one thing that really we can go for. But in fact, it's not that every product is made in India. So just think of the products that you are buying, the branded products that you are buying. Nike shoes, it is known for its exploitatory practices. If you look at many other Gap, for instance in Bangladesh, this company, this entire building collapsed. So actually this is what, it is not merely about made in India, it's also about made in these large companies.
Sorry, can I just get a comments from Sine on this
Please.
question before we
Yes.
finally wrap up and finish?
I think actually one of the points at the end of the film where it says if it's too cheap or very cheap, it's probably not a good deal for like labor exploitation. So think about the price of what you are buying. Does it seem reasonable compared to what it is that you are buying? That's one thing. Just like. Kind of common sense. It's not easy to be a consumer these days with these kind of things. There are websites, however, where you can, and some of them are more precise than others, and some of them are criticized, but there are different websites. It's like, which is called something like, is this and that product made by slave labor or child labor, and you can disagree with some of the terms perhaps, but some of them do actually go into analyze the supply chains and see if you buy a pair of jeans, where are all the different components made, and in that way you can kind of trace your product. But if things are very cheap, it's probably not without a problem.
Okay, I think
so
that's
expensive
sorry.
products, so expensive
Yeah,
products.
obviously.
Because
Yeah.
I tell you about Apple, the kind of margin they are taking on mobile phone.
Yeah.
Uh,
So expensive things
So-
are also a problem. So don't buy
So
anything.
on that note, to leave everyone very confused, that's all we have time for today. So thank you very much to Aradhna and Sine for coming.